Okay, so I'll just share my screen. You can see this?
Yeah.
It's probably better. All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Tim Sydock. I work with Tech Nation Canada. We are a member-driven nonprofit association representing the tech industry. We like to say we're the nexus between government and technology and academia. And part of what we do is the Career Ready program, where we offer wage subsidy to small and medium enterprises to hire students out of university and college in tech immersive roles. Through that program, we also do a lot of cool events like the Startup Skills Series, where we offer free entrepreneurship skills through speaking series or workshops. And we also do a lot of student challenges and career fairs. We have a career fair coming up on February 2nd. If anybody's interested in that, I can put my email in the chat and you can just send me an email and I'll add you to the list to make sure you get all the information for our future events. So today we're joined for part 2 of the self-management skills with Scott Rust. I guess I'm just gonna let you take it away since you've already gotten started and most people have already know who you are. So thanks so much for joining us today.
All right, Tim. Well, thank you for the introduction, and thanks everybody else for taking time out of your morning to join us for the art of energy management. And so I know for those of you that were here last week, we touched a little bit on time management, and so this week we're going to be looking around energy management. And so I always like to kind of quote a specific study or something and just see how it resonates with everybody in the group. And I was reading the other day around a study that said about 3 in 5 workers agree to take on more tasks than they can actually get done on their to-do list. And so I'm curious, maybe type in the chat here, does that resonate with you? Do you ever find yourself taking on more tasks than you can actually accomplish? And if so, then what is the impact on your energy levels? So we got Jason here that says 100%. So this does resonate with him. And I'm sure there's a few of you nodding along as well. And so the impact on your energy is, this feeling of just always being on. Maybe it's a feeling of overwhelm or being drained or being caught on this never-ending hamster wheel and just finding it challenging to kind of step back where you're taking on more than you can actually accomplish. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be seeking ways to leverage your daily energy levels to help you accomplish more. And so over the next 90 minutes, we're going to be looking at energy management habits to be able to create work-life harmony. So just a quick answer here. We had somebody who's asking, this session will be recorded and we will be sharing this with everyone afterwards. That's not to say we don't want your participation, and we'd really appreciate hearing from you and your attention throughout the next 90 minutes. And so I'd like to maybe give a little bit of background just on myself and how I got started and how I really came to this business with Intuitive Performance. I'm the co-founder as well as the COO. And it started about 4 or 5 years ago where I was representing a manufacturing facility in Asia. I was right out of university and allowed me to travel and work from home. Where in the past, when I told people about working from home, they didn't really resonate with them. But now when I talk about it, people really get it. But those first few weeks, being completely independent and on my own, I quickly realized how easy it was to procrastinate, to take a 2-hour lunch. And I found myself struggling to make progress on the goals I set for myself. So I knew a few weeks in, I could either coast by or I had some changes to make. And I decided looking back that, I was going to try to make some of these changes that I needed to make to be able to be successful in my role. And so I wrote this big list. I wrote this list of all the things I wanted to do. I wanted to wake up early. I wanted to eat healthy and work out. I wanted to make progress on my goals and manage my time better. And taking on all of these things at once, I quickly failed. And so I finally decided to look back at this list and said, well, what was one thing that might have a positive impact on everything else? And I decided, well, if I wake up early, if If I could wake up early, it would give me all this time to be able to do all the other things that I wanted to do during my day. And so after 4 months, I finally made waking up early a habit. And what it really showed me was the power of behavior change. You can actually change the way you do things, and it'll have a positive ripple effect on the way that you run your life. And so that's when I really started doing a deep dive on personal development and understanding a little bit more about these different behavior changes and habits and the role that habits play in our daily life. And so if you joined us last week, you'll know that habits make up about 40% of our daily decisions. And when I found that out, I decided, well, if I can optimize that 40%, I only have the other 60% of my daily decisions to really worry about. And that's really what we're here to discuss today. We're going to be looking at different energy management habits that will have you optimizing your day and really taking advantage of fluctuations in energy. So I'm just going to take a moment here and share my screen, and we'll go through the PowerPoint together. So I would really like this to be an interactive workshop. I'd encourage you to apply your input or share your experience in the chat box. And if you have any questions, please feel free to write them down, and I'll leave some time at the end to be able to talk about them. So I'd like to make this next 90 minutes or so as inclusive as possible, even though we're working here virtually. And so in terms of what we're going to be discussing here today, we'll first be looking at what is the best time for you to work? Energy fluctuates throughout the day. So what is your best time to work, and how can you align your tasks according to these fluctuations in energy? Next, we'll look at managing distractions. What are the costs of interruptions, or even the downside of working faster? And is it really productive working faster or not? And lastly, we'll be looking at the importance of taking refreshing breaks and how incorporating breaks might actually be really beneficial, not only towards your energy, but towards your productivity and overall output. And lastly, we're going to be wrapping this all up by creating a commitment plan. So rather than leaving you with that long list of things that you'd like to change, just like I had, it's finding one thing in this presentation, one thing that you feel would be or would have a ripple effect on everything else, and just starting to tackle that. And I always say it's progress over perfection. And the idea isn't to take on everything at once, but small changes over a long period can create sustainable results. So I'd like to start these presentations talking a little bit about a productivity paradigm. And the idea is we tend to talk a lot about time management, and if only I had an extra hour in my day, I'd be able to do so much more. Yet there's other things at play, and that's what brought us to create this self-management series. And so today we're going to be talking a little bit more about energy and the impact of energy on your productivity. And then next week we'll be looking at attention management. Now the idea here is if you're looking to be productive, you actually need to align your time, energy, and attention together. And anytime you take away one of these things, it's very challenging to be productive. Let's look at an example. Let's say you're focused and you have energy, but you don't have any time to actually be able to do anything, or your deadline is soon approaching. It's very challenging to be productive. Now, the same can be said if you have time on your side and you feel like you can focus, but you can only do it for really short periods of time. It's hard to really make progress on any of your projects or tasks. Now, lastly, have you ever found yourself with time on your hands and lots of energy, but then you jump from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, not really making progress on anything? You're lacking the attention or the focus you need to stick to just one task. So the idea here is, how can we align our time, energy, and attention to be a little bit more productive? So in terms of the business habits that we're going to be looking at, last week we touched on some time management strategies. And for those of you who might not have joined us last week, feel free to reach out to myself or Tim. We'd be more than happy to share the recording with you. This week, we're going to be discussing energy management. And I'd encourage you to join us next week, where we're going to be looking a little bit further at attention management and what are the costs of multitasking, how you can develop greater focus, and just have a better understanding about how your attention space works and how you might be able to optimize it. Now, does this resonate with anybody? I know it's only Tuesday, but has anyone felt like this sometime earlier this week or
I feel
yesterday?
like that right now.
Definitely. So, at times we just feel like, you know what, I wish we could just do it later. And it's interesting how we always have more time in the future than we have today until the future arrives and it becomes today. And then we think again, I have more time in the future. So how does the time of day impact your productivity? And I'm actually going to have you or ask you to share in the chat box. Do you notice fluctuations in your energy throughout the day? And when do you feel you get your best work done? Let's take a look in the chat box here. Is it in the morning? Is it right before lunch? Maybe it's before anybody gets up. Or maybe it's later in the day or even in the evening. When do you feel like you have the most energy and you work most productively? All right, so Ward says in the morning. We have another morning person. Jason says definitely mornings are more productive for me. Ooh, even after a workout. There you go. Nana says, oh, afternoon or night. So the thing is that our energy levels tend to fluctuate throughout the day and they follow a bit of a pattern. Now, what happens is we can actually experience extremes of up to or less than 20%. And so what I mean by that is, let's say on a regular day, you run at maybe 80% capacity, or it's impossible to run at 100% all the time. So what that means is if you regularly run at 80% capacity, sometimes you might jump up to 100, but other times you might actually fall down to 60%. Now, what is the impact if all of a sudden you take on your hardest tasks during the day, but you're running at 60%? Or what about the flip side? What if your energy levels are at 100% and yet you're working on things that are really menial and don't really demand cognitive attention? You're kind of wasting that optimal energy period on tasks and things that really aren't that important. So the idea here is one, being able to identify a little bit further as to, well, what are my energy fluctuations and how do I work best? And then from there, identifying, okay, well, how can I line my day and line my tasks according to those fluctuations in energy? So the best time for a task really actually depends on the task and it depends on your energy fluctuations. So I'd like us to look at two different types of tasks, and I'll actually have you kind of come up with some ideas as to what might be some tasks or some tasks that you have within your to-do list and whether they fall into one or two of these categories. So usually when we're looking at things, we have analytical tasks or insight tasks. So when we're talking about analytical things, they tend to require focus, maybe it's some type of problem solving or decision making. It requires a lot of brain power and focus to really look at these things and to immerse yourself in it. While we're thinking about maybe insight tasks, these require a certain level of creativity. Maybe it's some kind of brainstorming, or you might need some kind of inspiration. Now, what happens when we think about these two is analytical tasks tend to be cognitively demanding and demand your attention and really your focus, while insight tasks might actually be hindered by a lot of focus and might actually work better when you're a little bit more free or open and are less inhibited by that type of focus. So I'd like you to input in the chat here. What would be maybe a routine task that makes up your day or week? And does it fall into an analytical task or an insight task? Just for us to get a better idea of the difference between the two. So I'd like to hear maybe some of your examples based on the work that you're doing. So remember, analytical tasks require some kind of focus or some kind of problem solving or even decision making, while insight tasks might be a little bit more creative or brainstorming. So Daniel says, creating a new clothing design. So Daniel, would that be an analytical task for you or an insight task? Insight, okay. So creating a new clothing design. I need some kind of creativity, some kind of inspiration. And we have Phil who says, reviewing work in progress reports. That's an analytical task. So it's something you got to keep your head down. You're reviewing numbers or information. Okay. What else? Do we have any other examples as to what might be some analytical or insight tasks that you might have planned out for this week? So Zia says, have the impression that responding to emails doesn't fit into either of these categories. So I guess for emails, you're kind of right. It almost feels like it fits in the middle here. And I guess my suggestion to that would be, well, is it something that is maybe more administrative? Maybe we got to find a middle ground here that would be administrative tasks, but we'll actually touch on that a little bit later. So Bray says content creation. That's an insight task. So I'm creating content for my business, for my company, and I need to be a little more creative. So yeah, when we're looking at analytical tasks, tends to be reviewing data, maybe reviewing a strategy. But when we're looking at insight tasks, maybe it's actually coming up with that strategy or developing the plan. So these tend to kind of fall into each other where it's great to strategize, and that might be insight, but we might actually need to apply our analytical skills to actually implement that plan and put it into place. So an easy way to think about how to categorize each of these tasks is, and it's kind of a fun way too. So would you do better with a coffee to work on this task, or maybe a glass of wine or beer or champagne? And the idea here is maybe having a coffee and being really focused would provide you the focus you need, where I'm not recommending this, but just thinking about it in such a way, whereas maybe a glass of wine would actually help build inspiration. And kind of thinking about what kind of drink would go best with this task is an easy way to help categorize whether it's an analytical task or an insight task. So sorry, any questions on the differences between the two of these before I move on? Okay, seems like we're all on the same page. So what is the best time for you to work? And so I'd encourage you to grab a pen and paper, and we're actually going to go through an exercise together where we're going to determine what your chronotype is. And how we'll do that is we'll be looking at when you usually go to bed and get up, and then finding that midpoint. And then from there, identifying when and how you should be planning your day according to your chronotype. So your chronotype kind of describes fluctuations in your energy levels. And you might have noticed earlier where when I asked the question, like, when do you work best? We had some people say they work best in the morning, maybe in the morning after a workout. We had others that said, no, more towards the afternoon or even the evenings. And so let's take out a pen and paper. And on the right-hand side here, what you'll be writing down is time. Now, what we're looking to determine is, when do you usually fall asleep? So on a regular basis, when do you fall asleep? And then also determining, well, what time do you wake up at? And once you determine the time you fall asleep and the time you wake up, then it's finding where is your sleeping midpoint. So where's the halfway point between the two? So take a moment just to think about this. When you fall asleep, when do you wake up? And then what is your sleeping midpoint? And we'll actually go through this together. Okay, so let's go through an example together. And if you're not done, that's okay. We'll go through it here. So let's say an example would be maybe you fall asleep at around 11 p.m. So if you fall asleep at 11 p.m. and you wake up at 7 a.m., now you have about an 8-hour window. So an easy way to do this is just to work backwards from 7 a.m. So a midpoint would be 4 hours before 7 a.m. So your midpoint would actually be 3 a.m. Now, when we're determining your chronotype, what we're looking at is if your midpoint falls between 12 and 3 a.m., you tend to be what's called a lark. Where if your midpoint falls between 3 and 6 a.m., you're a third bird. And if it's between 6 and 10 a.m., you're an owl. So in this example here, you're either at the end point of being a lark or maybe the beginning point of being a third bird. So I'm curious, just by inputting in the chat here, which of these do you resonate with? Are you a lark? Are you a third bird? Or are you an owl? And let's just see how many we have of each of these in the room here today. Oh, so we've got a couple larks, a few third birds. Jason says he's a lark. Nalita is a third bird. Lark, lark. Okay. So it's interesting. I don't see anybody here that's mentioned that they're an owl. So we have a bit of a mix between lark and third bird. And that's actually not too surprising. Most people tend to fall into almost that middle category of 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. From that perspective. And so it's not surprising we actually have a lot of larks and third birds in the room. Now the idea is, well, what do we do with this? Okay, Scott, great. You've told me, you've helped me identify I'm a lark or a third bird or an owl. Now, how can I actually utilize this to my advantage? Now, the idea here is if you're a lark or a third bird, which a lot of us seem to be, I tend to fall into that category as well. You want to be looking at spending your mornings on working on analytical tasks or decisions. So we're looking at anything that's really cognitively demanding should be prioritized in the morning. Now, if you happen to be an owl, what you should be doing is actually is the opposite. And you should be prioritizing insight tasks that might require some kind of creativity in the morning. Now, looking towards the late afternoon, now we flip this over. So the larks and third birds will tend to focus on insight tasks later in the afternoon, when an owl might actually work best for analytical tasks in the late afternoon instead. Now, you might not have 100% control over your schedule, but just being aware of the rhythms in your energy fluctuations and how it works can be a great way for you to maybe identify, well, when should I have meetings? When is it my preference to have a meeting at least? And if you're a third bird or a lark, maybe having meetings later in the afternoon is better in the morning because it allows you to have that analytical and focus time for those types of tasks. Or if you're an owl, maybe it's the opposite. So it's taking advantage of small things that you have within your control and aligning your day accordingly. So just pause here. Do we have any questions about, or did anybody have any challenges in determining whether they're a lark, third bird, or owl? Or do we have any questions about how to align your tasks accordingly? So Daniel's asking, what does this bird mean, third bird? So it was actually coined, I believe it was coined by Daniel Pink in his book, When. And I think he coined the term, where most of the time we talk about larks and owls, but upon his research, he identified there was kind of this middle ground where he considered them third birds instead. So it's nothing more than that. So that's a fun fact there. All right. Any other questions? Anything else coming up for anybody? Okay. So I'd like us to take a look at this graph together. Now that we have a little bit of a better idea as to where we fit in, what you'll notice here on the left-hand side is we have our mood. Now, studies have shown that this fluctuation that you're seeing On the left-hand side, this could be your mood, but your happiness, your energy, your focus, even your emotional balance, all tends to follow this same or similar flow. Now, this specific chart is actually made for larks and third birds, where, as we had touched on a little bit earlier, if you look at the bottom here is your time of day. So time starting as early as 6 a.m. and then maybe ending at 11 p.m. What you'll notice is you have a bit of your peak at first, right at the beginning of the day, usually before 11 a.m. And again, depending on what category you fall into, this might fluctuate a little bit. And you should be looking at spending your time on analytical tasks during that peak period. So whether it be analyzing data, writing reports, maybe going through strategy proposals are some examples of how you might want to safeguard and utilize that morning hours. Now, we all tend to fall into this bit of a trough where we tend to, let's say, peak around 11 o'clock. And then from there, our energy, our mood, or our focus all tends to begin to dip into the afternoon. Now, when someone had mentioned, I think it was Didier mentioned a little bit about emails. Where do emails fit in? Now, administrative tasks are really good during this trough period, where maybe you're answering emails and they're not very or highly important. You're not making large decisions that require a lot of your focus or a lot of your cognitive, or they're not cognitively demanding. Look at maybe answering those emails, making those routine calls, or filling out simple spreadsheets during that trough period as your energy begins to dip. Now, a lot of us might not work past 5 p.m. And again, this graph isn't perfect, but you might notice that maybe even around 3 p.m., you might start to get a bit of a recovery. And you might find yourself a little bit more energized at 3 p.m. or 4 than you were at 2. Now, this is your energy levels, they become to rise. And this might be a great opportunity for insight problems. So if you're looking at strategizing, if you're looking at, creating designs or creating content, that might actually be a really good time to be able to start spending on those types of activities. So I'd encourage you, next time you're planning your day or you're looking through your different tasks, is to take a step back and say, rather than just going through the to-do list as you usually do, trying to reorder everything depending on what types of tasks they are. They're analytical tasks, administrative tasks, or maybe insight problems, and really making the best use of your energy throughout the day. Any questions on this? Okay. So as we're bringing this section to a close, we looked at, the daily energy levels and how they fluctuate. We talked about, or we helped you identify whether you're an owl, a lark, or a third bird. We also looked at the difference between analytical and insight tasks. And finally discussed a little bit about the impact of time of day on your energy and how that can actually fluctuate up to extremes of 20%, kind of showing the importance of planning your day according to fluctuations in energy. Now, the next section we're going to be looking at here is managing distractions. And I took on a client, Christina, who owns her own recruiting business. Now, as an entrepreneur and a working mom, she was facing challenges managing distractions and interruptions from her kids. Now, does this make sense? Does anybody else have issues, with either colleagues or roommates or even siblings or kids interrupting your workflow? And sometimes this might cause a certain level of frustration every time you get interrupted, and which then builds upon that frustration, becomes even more difficult to get back to work. So in working with Christina, what we did was we created a plan on how she might be able to handle these interruptions in a way that had minimal impact on her focus. Now, she said by working together and incorporating the tools that we described, she was able to be more focused, and she was actually able to accomplish more, even though she was still getting distracted. Now, how does that sound to you? why don't we dive in and look at ways how you might be able to manage distractions to be able to leverage your focus on your highest impact tasks. So working faster comes at a price. So do you ever feel like working faster? I know we mentioned the study at the beginning of the session, which was around 3 out of 5 people take on more tasks than they know they can actually handle. Now, what do you do when you have an overwhelming list of tasks? Do you tend to work faster? Now, the question is working faster, are you really getting more done, or does it come at a cost? Now, a study done at UC of Irving showed that people compensate for interruptions by working faster. You're getting interrupted by your colleagues or your kids, and that makes you try to work faster. But this comes at a price. What happens is you tend to experience more stress, higher frustration, greater time pressure, and even putting in more effort. It has a negative consequence on your energy. Now, in addition to all these negative emotional impacts, what happens is that they actually, the briefest interruption can actually double a worker's error rate. Now, so what this means is that by working faster, you're more prone to making errors, which in the end means you'll have to come back and fix those errors. Or maybe you're not submitting the quality of work that you expect for yourself. So a lot of times working faster might, have a lot of adrenaline, make you feel like you're getting a lot done. But in reality, there's a lot of costs that come along with it. And what's actually more, one way you might be able to accomplish more is by actually taking a step back rather than jumping right in and working faster. Being a little bit more intentional with what you're looking to accomplish, getting clear on that end goal, and then setting a time to try and work on something as focused as possible and really bring it towards the end goal, rather than just trying to work through it as quickly as possible. So what are some other costs of interruptions and distractions? Well, the average person in the workplace, now this is back in the office, was interrupted 13.9 times a day. Now, I haven't read too many studies about the impact at home. However, I can almost imagine this number being higher working from home. Now, what are your thoughts? I'd like to hear from you. Do you think, how many times might you get interrupted or distracted during the day? Maybe write down the number or even put it in the chat if you like. But what happens when we're interrupted is that when you get interrupted or distracted, it tends to take about 20 minutes or so before you come back to your original task. Now, let me explain this a little bit further, and you can let me know if it resonates. So has it ever happened to you where maybe you're working on a project or you're developing a strategy, and all of a sudden an email comes in, and you notice the email, so you go and click on it. And by reading that email, it then leads you into a web browser. Now you open up your web browser and you actually have 5 or 6 other tabs that are open. And once you've done what you were looking at doing, you actually jump in and open up one of those tabs, or maybe get distracted by a social media piece, or maybe a blog post you had kept there earlier that you wanted to read. Now 20 minutes goes by and you've almost forgotten about that original project or original strategy piece that you were working on. Now, does that resonate at all? Do you ever find yourself jumping from one thing to the other, and then almost forgetting to come back to what you were originally working on again, or having to ask yourself? So what happens is that when we're able to reduce the number of distractions, we can all work more productively. We have increased levels of motivation, and overall, we're much happier at work. All right, so Andre says yes constantly, right? And I think you speak for a lot of us, Andre, in terms of jumping from one thing to the other and almost forgetting what we were working on. So I'd like to hear from you. What are your favorite distractions? Why don't we use the chat box here and input, what are some of those distractions that tend to always pull your attention away and help and make you lose focus, whether they be within your control or outside your control. What are those favorite distractions? So Nada says phone call and emails. Nalita says playing with my dog when working from home. Phil says email and phone calls. Tyler says phone calls. All right. Jason says coworkers, phone calls and emails. So I see phone calls and emails are at the top of the list, and they tend to be with good reason. So taking a step back here, we've identified that working faster actually comes at a cost. And the more interruptions and distractions that we have also come at a cost, which impacts our productivity and focus. So moving on to the next piece here, we're going to go through an exercise together. And we're going to identify different types of interruptions and distractions. And then we'll look at ways of how you might be able to manage these to be able to accomplish more. Now, let's take a look at this together. So I grabbed that pen and paper that you have in front of you. And on the top side, on the top here, we're going to write annoying and fun. So when you think about distractions or interruptions, they tend to be annoying or fun. And then on the left-hand side, we're going to write in outside your control or no control, and then within your control or in control. So I'll leave you just a moment to create this table. So if you're done creating this table, take a moment and write in the chat. What are some interruptions or distractions that are outside your control and that you would consider to be annoying? So things that are outside your control and are annoying. Any thoughts on this? So again, looking at distractions that are outside your control. So Marcus says texting. So I check in here, Marcus, would you consider texting, would that be outside your control or maybe that's within your control? And I do apologize. I think we always start off the hardest one first. Angela says IT issues. Yes. Have you ever had any issues with your internet or trying to connect your phone or anything along those lines? Definitely put that into the annoying and outside control. So Jason says change orders on projects that are outside my control. The client comes in or my manager comes in and tells me I need to make these changes on a project. I felt like I was already done. I had crossed that off my to-do list, and yet now I got to come back to it and start over again. So other things that come up in the no control and annoying category can be, let's say, interruptions, maybe pointless meetings. I felt compelled after one of my presentations, somebody mentioned COVID-19. And so I included that in the no control and annoying types of interruptions. And then lastly, maybe family or pets. You know, at times, you know, they can fall into the annoying category. Disease says here, urgent requests from team members. Okay. Site issues. See, there we go. Now we're getting going. Cheyenne says, yes, COVID is up there for sure. Okay. So what about no control and fun? What would be some things that might fall into that category? Some of the things that are outside your control, but actually bring you a certain sense of joy. So now this is a friend calls. Okay. Again, if they're calling, I might encourage you to think about that as being within your control. So fun, Marcus writes, okay, receiving new work from clients. So I think there are a few things here. And maybe, the friend or colleague interruptions might be more relevant in the workplace, but maybe at home, maybe a family member or a pet or even a roommate comes in and bothers you. And I included here, I might be a little bit biased, but I included trainings. Maybe you've been asked to come to this training here today. And so I put trainings down in the fun category, I hope. So what about the in control? And we'll pick up the pace here a little bit. When we're thinking about those things in control and annoying, I think we had a couple of them where maybe it's, receiving calls about urgent issues or things coming up. So maybe it's a notification on your phone. Maybe it's phone calls or emails. Has it ever happened to you cleaning your desk where all you looking to do was just to rearrange a few papers in your desk? And then 20 minutes later, you find yourself out with the Lysol and actually washing things down and rearranging the entire setup. Jason says yes. Okay, I'm glad I'm not the only person this has happened to, right? It's almost a form of procrastination, but it's definitely a distraction that I guess is annoying because it impacts your work. But I could see, Angela, how this might be fun as well, where at least now I get to come to a nice clean desk. So I think for me, if I had done it with intention and I set aside 20 minutes to clean my desk, that would be fun. But when I know I have a project due and here all I'm doing is cleaning the desk, that's where maybe it might fall in the annoying category. And then lastly, when we're looking at those things in your control and fun, it could be, we mentioned it earlier, a client calling about exciting work. Maybe a friend calls me. Maybe it's taking an extended lunch. Sometimes even research can be a form of a fun distraction that, you know what, I know I had enough research already, but yet here I am, I keep looking because I actually enjoy it. Or maybe, it's an article or a blog post. So now the real question is okay, great. We've identified these 4 types of categories, but how can we actually manage them? What do we do about them? So let's take a look first at the things that are outside your control. So if something is outside your control and annoying, you want to look at ways on how you might be able to minimize it as much as possible. If it's a meeting, maybe, requesting or asking if your attendance is necessary. If it's, an interruption from somebody else, whether it be a family member, a pet, a colleague, whatever that looks like, just trying to minimize that interruption as much as possible, and then coming back to what you're working on as quickly as possible. So the idea is to minimize that distraction. In terms of the things that's fun, and I think somebody had mentioned it earlier, yes, my kid comes in and they distract me. It's an interruption. Well, if it's something that's fun, you might as well enjoy it. Rather than getting frustrated that this distraction, this interruption happened, enjoy it in the moment. That way, and then come back to work as quickly as possible. And the idea here is if you're able to lower your levels of frustration, you'll be much more likely to be able to come back to the task you're working on and become focused again. Because it's easier to come back to a task from a place of joy than it is to come from a place of frustration or anger. Now, the last piece here is always the one that is most challenging. If you have any of these things that are within your control, well, it's up to you to be proactive. You have to look at ways in how you might be proactively eliminate these distractions and interruptions because you have control over them. Now, what that means might be, putting your phone away and out of sight. It might mean, blocking specific applications on your computer. Looking at different ways to proactively eliminate the types of distractions that you tend to fall into. So before we move on this, do we have any questions about how you might be able to manage distractions? Or maybe there's something that's coming up for you that's not even listed here, and you're just curious how you might be able to manage that. Okay, we'll save some time at the end if there are any other questions that might come up. So the last piece on this section I'd like us to look at is making a list of focus habits. So we're talking about proactively eliminating these types of distractions. It can almost be really great just to create a checklist as to when I want to do focused work, here are the different things that I do. So some examples can include putting your phone out of sight. Now, turning it upside down is actually not enough. Just the fact that you see your phone and you know that the dark hole that you can go into just by looking at it, it'll pull your attention and it'll drain your energy just by being in your sight. So look at ways of putting out of sight when you want to be focused. Next is proactively eliminate distractions we just talked about. And if they are outside your control, look at minimizing them or enjoying them in the moment. The next one here I think is really interesting. And we'll talk a little bit further about this in the attention management virtual workshop next week. But it's externalizing your thoughts. So have you ever had it where you're working on something and you kept having these different ideas or thoughts that were coming up in your mind, and it was distracting you from focusing on what was in front of you? So studies have shown that actually by writing out the thought, by writing it down by hand, it actually helps externalize the idea. And now you've actually placed it on a piece of paper that you know you can get back to. And it's one way that has actually helped create greater focus on what you're working on and help save energy levels at the same time. The next is maybe using caffeine strategically, whether that's instead of having a coffee at the same hour every morning, maybe it's only having a coffee when you actually feel your energy begin to dip. Or maybe it's having a piece of dark chocolate in the middle of the day to help bring you a little bit more energy to move forward. The other piece we're just about to jump into here is the importance of taking refreshing breaks. And then lastly is maybe looking at batching tasks. Rather than answering an email as soon as it comes in, one at a time, maybe it's allocating 30 minutes or an hour to clear your inbox. And that's a great way of getting into the flow of things, and it's a good way just to use your resources wisely in terms of time, energy, and attention. Okay. So the next part we're going to be talking here is the importance of taking refreshing breaks. Now, has it ever happened to you where you end the day feeling exhausted? Day after day, you keep working and you take the day, reach the end of the day, and you just feel completely depleted with little energy to either spend with your partner, your kids, your friends, or even yourself. Now, one of my coaching clients, Joseph, brought this up, I think it was just 2 weeks ago. And what he said is, Scott, we've started implementing some of these tools and it's really helped me stay organized and work more effectively. Yet I still end each day feeling exhausted. So in taking a step back, what we did was we analyzed how he spent his time throughout the day. And what we found was that he regularly took lunch at 2 p.m. and rarely took breaks in between. Now, do we have anybody else that might find themselves doing that? Pushing their lunch hour off longer and longer, even though they might intend at taking it at 12 o'clock? And how many breaks might you be taking in between? So what happened was, we identified by working consistently for 5 hours straight from 9 to 2 without stopping to take a break, it's no wonder Joseph was ending the day feeling burnt out. So if you ever find yourself in the same position, the idea is the ideal break is to be taken before you actually need it. So in working with Joseph, what we determined was that he was going to have lunch earlier in the day, and that was almost a forced break. And then he was also going to start incorporating water breaks to help him get up from his desk and move around, to be able to take his eyes away from his computer. And what happened was this ended up providing him with greater energy at the end of each day. So he was accomplishing the same amount, but he was ending the day feeling less exhausted. So let's look at some ways about how you might be able to incorporate that into your day-to-day. So we're going to take a moment and read this. So for those of you that might be rushing through work or looking to spend as much time working as possible, at times, the most productive thing you can do is actually take a break. Now, this might not only just benefit your energy levels, but it'll also benefit the other people that are around you, and it'll benefit the work that you're doing. There's 3 main benefits of taking a break. First is it helps you maintain focus. So by taking a break, you come back more focused. Secondly, it helps replenish energy levels. So taking a break is a way of recharging your batteries before you become depleted. The third piece, which is often overlooked, is taking a break actually reactivates your goal orientation. Now, what I mean by that is, have you ever been working on a project or working on a task and you knew the end goal was over here, but then what happened was a few hours went by and you were completely off target of what you really were looking to accomplish? Now, I'd like to use the example of a flight. Maybe a flight is flying from Newfoundland to Vancouver. And what happens is it doesn't fly a complete straight line, a perfect straight line. What happens is it continues to course correct. It flies in the general direction of Vancouver and it course corrects throughout the time, always keeping the goal in mind. But the thing is how we might be able to utilize that in our day-to-day or work lives is by taking a break, it provides us an opportunity to course correct. It provides you an opportunity to re-identify, what am I looking to accomplish here? And is what I'm working on really helping me get there? So the last piece is optimal breaks require you to be fully detached. And we'll be looking at creating a refreshing break list after this. But I think a good example of why optimal breaks, if you're looking to recharge, actually require you to be fully detached is, have you ever spent an hour or 2 hours on watching a TV show or on Netflix and then got up from that 2 hours and felt, I feel so energized and refreshed? Even watching TV, scrolling through Instagram or social media, even that drains your energy. So if you're really looking to recharge, what you want to do is create breaks that actually allow you to detach. Checking emails in between meetings isn't actually a break. Taking a step away to grab a glass of water and take a breath, that's a break that'll help you recharge. And so this helps move us into the next part here that I want to talk about, which is, when is the best time to take a break? And I really like to get your input on this. If we're looking at when is the best time to take a break, is it when you're at 75% energy, when you're at 50%, at 25, or even when you're at 0 and then starting over again? What do you think is the best time for using those percentages to take a break? At 75, 50, 25, or even 0? Sharon says 30. Ada says 75. Andre 75. Daniel says 25. And Bray falls right in the middle there at 50%. Katie at 50% as well. Okay. So it seems like we're having varied responses as to when is the best time to take a break. So when we're really looking at this, we know that there's something called law of diminishing returns. And what happens is when you're at 25% capacity, the work that you're putting out, or your output level, significantly diminishes compared to your output at 75%. So the idea here is the best time to take a break is before you need to take a break. And so if you're waiting to get to 0% before recharging, it's going to take you a long time to bring your capacity up until a point where you can actually be productive again. And so the way I like to think about it, and it could be different for everybody, is almost using the 50% marker as the middle ground. As in, anything below that, your work significantly diminishes. And if you're looking at what energy levels do I provide my best work, it's probably between that 75 and 100%. So if you're looking to provide your best work, look at taking a break when you're at 75% to help you recharge again at 100. And therefore, you're always staying within that period. Now, obviously, over the course of a day, that'll continue to diminish, and we can't always be running at 100%. But just keeping that thought process in mind about taking a break before you need it can be really valuable in managing your energy levels. So why don't we look at ways at how you might be able to take breaks? We've talked about the importance of having breaks that are detached and not cognitively demanding. So let's look at some of the ways here. And I think actually I had Cheyenne who mentioned one specific type of break that we might be able to implement. So I'm going to turn it over to you. I'd like you to use the chat box. And what are some short breaks that might be 5 or 10-minute breaks that might provide you an opportunity to recharge or to relax in between meetings or in between work projects? Let's hear some examples in the chat box here. So get fruit or vegetables for a snack. Katie says making a coffee or tea. Nana says getting up and coffee. Shannon says meditating. Maybe going for a quick walk outside or walking the dog if you need it. Having a water break. Bray says get up and stretch. Just moving around, right, can actually have a really big impact on your energy levels. Jason says fresh air. Nana says check social media. So Nana, I'd recommend or I'd encourage you maybe to avoid checking social media, where emails and even social media tend to drain some portions of your energy. Even though they might be less cognitively demanding, going for a walk tends to provide greater energy, for example, than spending 5 or 10 minutes checking social media, at least from my experience, but I'll leave that up to you. Okay. So I know I'm the only one that's actually on camera here, but I'd like everybody to go through just a quick 1-minute movement. And maybe it'll just be for 30 seconds here. I would just like to hear how you feel afterwards. So I'd encourage you, if you're sitting at your desk, to stand up. If you don't really want to stand up, that's okay as well. But just take a moment and let's move around a little bit together. Why don't we stretch it out a bit? Especially if we've been standing or sitting for the past hour or hour and a half, just moving around a little bit. And you don't need to take very long. Just take 10 or 15 seconds even just to do this. All right. So for those of you that moved around a little bit, I'm curious. How do you feel right now? Do you feel a little bit more energized? Do you feel more tired? Maybe chat me, input in the chat here, and just let me know. Give me a plus sign or a minus sign, or even use one of the emojis that we have available on Zoom as to how did that feel just moving around for 15 or 30 seconds. So Bray says refreshed. I know I feel a little bit better. I feel a little bit more concentrated or focused on this presentation. So I think the idea here is to use this as an example that, you know what, even just taking 15 or 30 seconds away from your desk, just to move around a little bit, can make you feel, as Nana mentioned, left stiff. Bray says feel refreshed. So this excuse that, you know, I just don't have time for breaks is a poor excuse, unfortunately. And so look at ways at how you might be able to incorporate some of these short breaks that'll help you feel a little bit more refreshed when you come back to work. Now, what about longer breaks? And we'll go through this a little bit quicker. But when we're thinking about longer breaks, I like to check in here. What are some longer breaks you might be able to take throughout the day that when your batteries are maybe at 50% at this point, you need a little bit more time to come back feeling refreshed? What else might you be able to do? I think some of these short breaks we've discussed earlier might be able to be long breaks as well, whether it may be taking the dog out for a walk or maybe doing some yoga. What are some other examples of some longer breaks you might be able to take? All right, so Jason and Nada both say working out. So do a workout in the middle of the day. And when we're looking at creating work-life harmony, the idea is moving away from work-life balance and putting everything in silos and saying, this is when I work and this is when I'm not working. Because those lines have become really blurred when, you know, our office is steps away from the bedroom or kitchen. And so by incorporating long breaks during your day can actually allow you to be more focused and productive throughout the entire day. And maybe the working hours, depending on your situation, how much control you have over your schedule, but changing up some of those working hours might be a great way to help benefit from maximizing your energy levels throughout the day. Especially if you know that, you know what, you produce really poor work around 2 or 3 o'clock, maybe it's a great time to go do a workout and maybe to apply yourself and work a little bit later instead, or start a little bit earlier in the day. So some other examples could include hiking, maybe socializing, maybe it's personal care or reading for pleasure. maybe it's planning a vacation sometime in the future and looking forward to doing that at some point soon. Let's hope. So what we've looked at here is the importance of taking a break. We talked about how you might be able to manage distractions, whether it be minimizing them, enjoying them, or getting really proactive. And lastly, we've talked about the cost of interruptions, the cost of working faster, and how you might be able to avoid that. So do we have any questions before we move on to creating a bit of a commitment plan based on what we've discussed here today? All right, it seems like we're all on the same page. So this next section here is, I would like us to identify, going back through this presentation, maybe a business habit that you might be able to incorporate that will have a ripple effect on the way that you work and manage your energy levels. So when we're talking about business habits, they really are the way that you work. The way that I like to look at it, it's the container in which things get done. And so by focusing on business habits, we're really building a foundation to help you thrive at work that'll also have a ripple effect on the other things that you do throughout the day. So let's take a look at some of the business habits we discussed today. So we talked about creating a refreshing break list. We looked at different focus habits. We discussed ways to manage distractions and working with intention rather than working faster. We identified, different energy fluctuations and the difference between analytical and insight tasks. You also helped identify whether you're an owl, a lark, or a third bird. We also looked at this productivity paradigm and how you can align your time, energy, and mind, or attention. And so I'd like to get your input and maybe just share it in the chat here. What is one key takeaway that you've had from this presentation that you feel would have a positive impact on how you manage your energy levels or how you work? And just type it in the chat. What is one thing that you might have written down, or maybe it's something on this list here that you feel have a positive impact on the way that you work? So I know we're getting close to towards the end of the presentation, and everybody's energy might be depleting a little bit, but we're almost there, and I'd just like to get your input here. And the idea here is to identify one thing, and then from there we can actually create a plan around how you might be able to implement that on a regular basis. So Dizier says, be more cognizant of analytical versus insight tasks, and then actually identify when I should be doing them. So Katie says, organizing my day based on analytical and insight tasks. Okay. Anybody else? Anyone else have anything else they'd like to add? So Angela says focus habits. So it's almost having a checklist as to how do I get focused? And when I'm doing focused work, these are the ways I'll maybe proactively eliminate distractions. All right, Nada agrees as well, using the focus habits. Okay. So once you've identified your business habit you'd like to take action on, let's take a look at how you might be able to create a commitment plan around it. Now, for those of you that were here last week, you'll have seen this already, but it'll serve as a good reminder. Now, the idea is when we're talking about changing behaviors or habit change, what happens is there tends to be a trigger or a cue before we embark on our current behavior. Now, the trigger tends to be either a time of day, maybe having coffee at 9 a.m. Maybe it's a location. So the trigger might be sitting down at your desk and then jumping into emails right away. It could be after an event. Maybe it's social influence. You might act a certain way with certain friends versus others. And maybe emotional state. There's a reason why we tend to reach for the ice cream let's say when you're feeling down versus when you're feeling up. So the idea when we're really thinking about these business habits, it tends to be time of day, location, or maybe even after an event. And so what we're looking to do is first identify what's our trigger. Second from there is to say, okay, well, what's the current behavior that I'm acting upon? And once I identify that current behavior, what's the new business habit I'm looking to implement? And what we get from this is a bit of a statement. It's a statement that says, well, when X happens, instead of Y, I will Z. And so what that means is that when I'm triggered, instead of acting on my current behavior, I will do this new business habit. And so let's go through a few commitment plans together. And what I'd like you to do is to actually create your own commitment and look at how you might be able to implement it. And I'll actually take some time to answer any questions or help you form your commitment plan as we move forward. So let's take a look at a couple of examples. So one commitment can be, when I start my day, instead of doing what's urgent, I will align my tasks with energy levels. So coming back to that idea of being cognizant of analytical insight tasks and when you're looking at doing them. Another example could be, when I need to focus, instead of jumping right in, I'll proactively eliminate distractions. So here, maybe it's relying on your focus habit checklist and utilizing that as a way to help develop greater focus. The last example that we have here is, when I'm feeling drained, instead of pushing through, I will take a refreshing break. So when I'm feeling drained, instead of pushing through or waiting till I'm at 0% or maybe 25% of energy levels, I'll take a break before that so that I can continue to work at a higher capacity. So I'd like you to take a moment to create your own. And I'd like to hear from you as to what might be your commitment. So just as a reminder, it's when I, and this is maybe some form of trigger, instead of engaging in my current behavior, I will start this new behavior. And because we're a bit of a smaller group here, I'd encourage you maybe just to come off mute and just share with me, what is your commitment? So do we have anybody that might be willing to share first?
Hello,
Hello.
it's Daniel.
All right. Hi, Daniel. Thank you for being brave enough to be the first one to come on.
All right, no problem. Well, I would say when I am distracted by my kid coming in to need something, I will take the time out and mindfully support them instead of trying to delay the engagement, let's say.
Okay. So if I can reflect back, what I heard is, when I'm distracted by my kid, instead of delaying the distraction or his or her needs, I will pay attention to what they need and then come back to my work as quickly as possible.
Yes.
Okay. And so why would this be an important thing to implement for you?
Because it helps create better behaviors for myself and for what my child can expect when I do help. I'm going to help fully, but it's going to be within a set period. It's 10 minutes to help out, and it's time for them to go back, and it's time for me to go back.
Okay, so I'm being a role model for my child, and I'm also, engaging in behaviors that will help me and my own work. Now, what might get in the way of you taking action on this?
Being in the middle of a webinar like this.
Ooh, okay. So being in the middle of a webinar like this. And so what would be maybe a small step if the goal is to take the 10 minutes off and go attend to their needs? What would be maybe a small step towards that goal that might be easy to take action on?
Seeing if they can commit to, in 20 minutes, we will go and do that, committing to the time and the action that we will take care of it.
Okay.
See you in 20.
All right. And so does that feel easier to commit to rather than committing to always putting all of your attention away?
Yes.
All right. Sounds good. Anything else coming up for you?
Oh no, that's good. I've tried to put it into practice already.
All right. Sounds good then. Well, I really appreciate you sharing. And so the idea here, and everyone we'll give him Daniel a virtual applause here, is not only identifying, well, what is this new behavior I'm looking to take action on, but also maybe what's one small step in that direction where we know changing behavior is hard. And the idea is maybe creating what's our ideal and then maybe create some smaller steps on how we can implement that ideal. And so based on Daniel's explanation and example here, the ideal would be to take the 10 minutes away and attend to his child's needs, where maybe an easy step in that direction would actually just be taking a minute aside and saying, okay, what are your needs? And can we maybe address them at a later time? Okay. Does anybody else, or who's next? Who would like to maybe share their commitment? And we can take a look at it together.
Hey, Scott, can you hear me there?
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, this is Jason here. My thing is, my trigger is when I start new projects or tasks or changes, whatever it would be.
Mhm.
My problem is I, instead of like multitasking or going down the rabbit hole, or because I mean, even if you want to jump off one thing to do a little task, they think it would take 5 minutes. That little task can turn into more little tasks, and then you're just down this rabbit hole. And so I guess I'm going back to, I will manage my distractions, and whether that's shutting my door, do not disturb, or whatever it is. I just never do that. I just seem to just try to do it all.
Okay. All right then. So if I can reflect back, what I heard was when I have a new task or something comes onto my plate, instead of trying to do it all and multitask, I'll proactively eliminate some of those distractions.
Correct.
All right then. And so how about for yourself? What would the impact be if you were able to better manage your distractions?
Probably check off a lot of items, even though I think like I'm doing them all at the same time, and I'm going through, but I'm probably only going like 25% of this one, 50% of this one, 80% of that one. You know, just focus on the one, get that off your list, then move on to the next one. So prioritize and attack the ones you need to first.
Yeah, so I'll be able to prioritize my time and
or follow through it with it, I guess is what I should say. Like once you do it, just follow through with it. Don't, just don't leave it at 80%. Don't leave it at 50%.
So by implementing this, you'll be able to bring your task to completion rather than having a to-do list of 80% completed items.
Yes.
All right. And so what would be maybe an easy action step, or one way you might be able to manage your distractions that you'd be willing to commit to?
Close my office door more.
Okay. And if we were to get a little bit more clear,
sorry. I when I say it like that, it's like we always talk to our co-workers, or when you're a project manager, you're always dealing with input from elsewhere. And I find if your door closes, people know that you're in there working. As I say, I just like to have my door open, so I'm always aware. But it just leads me to do constant multitasking, because I don't want to just say no or I guess just always want to be there, but I realize I can't be there all the time.
So if I'm hearing correctly, maybe it's for focused work or work that really requires your cognitive attention.
More the analyst. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
At those times, I will close my door.
Yeah.
All
I think it's a start. Do not disturb. You may be on my phone or email. I know some of my coworkers are starting to do that, and maybe I should do it too.
Okay, then. So I heard the second one there might be actually putting the phone on do not disturb.
Yeah.
And I'm sensing there's already a focus checklist in the making here. That I encourage you. I've had clients that literally will post it next to their computer and they'll go through the list and say, okay, I've done all these things. Okay, I can work now.
Right.
So yeah, all right then, Jason, was there anything else coming up for you?
Nope. It's this one was really, I was part of last week's, but this is really interesting just with the energies and more. It's almost like reassures some of the things that I am doing correctly or makes sense, or when the time of day to focus on certain things and the breaks and all that. So it's interesting. Thank you.
All right, no, thank you for your participation, and I'd encourage you to come next week as well. We have a multitasking exercise that is quite eye-opening as to how well we can actually multitask.
Right on. Ready, signed up for it. Thanks.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.
Okay then. So we have a few more minutes here. Maybe we can take one more person if there's anybody interested in sharing. There's anyone else that maybe is finding it challenging to create their statement here, or might just look for a little bit of input as to how they might be able to move forward?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
who are we speaking with?
Nada.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nada.
Yeah. So I wanna share my trigger for this time. I think what I'm gonna be doing this for this session, once I get in the morning, start to put my to-do list or task, usually I go to my emails and answer it right away without prioritize my stuff. But
Okay.
this time I will take my time, go through the emails and prioritize it according to the analytical or insight work.
Okay. So if what I'm hearing is, so when I start my day, instead of going into my inbox first, I will prioritize tasks based on analytical and insight tasks.
Yes, and check emails to put it under these lists as well, kind of like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So even categorizing some emails. And
Yeah.
so I would encourage you, and I think we touched on this last week as well, for those of you that were here, is to identify and prioritize your day prior to looking at emails. And the
Okay.
reason I encourage this is emails tend to be demands on your time or energy from other people. Where if you want to put your projects first, you have to plan for them first, and then look at what other people's demands might be, and then look at planning that accordingly. And so, and for yourself, Nada, what would be an easy way to take action on this new behavior?
Don't turn my computer first. Just sit first on my, and
Ooh,
put my
okay.
list.
So don't even open the computer up or turn it on. I'll
Yeah.
sit down and prioritize first, and then I'll open up my computer.
Yeah.
Okay, so I like
And
it. It's a really visual trigger that, opening the computer up is physical as well.
yeah, and actually I like that you say something, and I really like that, making time during the day to check your emails in bulk instead of checking every single email comes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so batching tasks together and completing them all at once.
Yeah.
And what happens is you tend to get in a bit of a flow. And not that answering emails is challenging, but if you're jumping from answering emails to creating content to strategizing, it starts to split our attention, and our attention really isn't made that way. And it also has an impact on our energy. So I really appreciate you sharing.
Thank you.
Okay. Was there anything else coming up or any other questions? All right, then. So as we're bringing it to a close, what I'd really appreciate is thank you, first of all, for everybody for coming today. And if you like this presentation, don't thank me, but thank your events specialist from Tech Nation, Tim, who's on this call right here. And maybe give him a thank you in the chat and show your appreciation for him and the team at Tech Nation for bringing me here. I'm also going to be sharing in the chat just a feedback form. And I'd really appreciate just to hear a little bit about what was your experience like? Was this up to par to what you expected? What are some ways or some things that we might be able to improve so that other people can learn a little bit as well? And lastly, maybe what are some other topics of interest that you might like to learn or hear about? So I'd really appreciate if you took the time It's only about 4 or 5 questions or so. Most of them are just rating on a scale. And I've just shared it in the chat here where you can click on the form and provide your feedback. So if you'd like to learn more, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn as well. And I'll actually just end the slideshow at the moment. And I'll stick around for a few minutes. If anybody has any questions, if you have your commitment statement written out and you'd like to share it and kind of go through it a little bit together, we can do that as well. And otherwise, for the rest of you, thank you very much and have a good rest of the week.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Scott. And thank you everybody for coming this week. Make sure you join next week. I'll cancel the calendar invite and resend it because some people got confused with the Microsoft Teams and Zoom is a little bit more comfortable. So yeah, just look out for that invite.
Okay, sounds good then, Tim. Thank you. Like I said, if anybody has any questions, I'll stick around for a little bit. I'm more than happy to answer those. Again, thank you, Didier, Bray, and Kayla. Thank you all for showing up. Andre and Hillary as well. Nada, Jason, really appreciate your input. Well, looking forward to seeing everybody next week at the attention management workshop. It's the last workshop as part of this 3-part series. All right, thank you, Phil, as well. Have a good rest of the day. All right, thanks, Tyler. Look forward to seeing you next week. Yeah, next week.